So I want to tell you a little bit about Lead the Way. So Lead the Way is a leadership initiative for emerging executive directors and mid-level managers working on a range of social justice issues. I started Lead the Way in 2004 when I was a young executive director full of passion for my community and social change, but I did not know what I was doing. I didn't know how to fundraise, I didn't know program development, I hired anybody who looked friendly, frankly. And I was sitting at work, and this was before social media, internet was just happening, email was just happening, and I said, you know what would be really great is if there was a program for women of color, young, where we could learn the skills that we needed to learn in a safe, nurturing environment, and that we could do it like at the beach. That was like at the beach, and also model self-care. So, you know, we have the best food, we are on the, well, you don't get a lot of beach time, I have to be honest. But you look at the beach. And it is so amazing, and we bring in women of color leaders who have been working in the field for a long time, who not can only speak to the issues that we care about or that are important, fundraising, human resource management, but have also done it and know the specific experiences of women of color working in the sector. So I'm really happy to say that in 2004, a group of young women answered the call and we went away to Miami. And we've been doing it ever since. And one of the things I know for sure is that many of the women I met in 2004 are still my sisters and colleagues in the work today. And they've gone on to do amazing work. We're talking about Latifah Simon, the MacArthur Fellow. We're talking about Linda Saussure. We're talking about Alicia Garza, Sylvia Henriquez, Benita Miller, Joanne Smith. Everybody, let me tell you something. Somebody called us the Brown Girl Illuminati. It's really amazing. And this is my passion, and this is my work, and I love it. No matter what I'm doing in the world, I always return to this program. Right here are 4 fellows, 2019 fellows, and Tequila is really lovely. So, and is now, you went to the mid-level manager. Mid-level. She's an executive director. And so I invite you to learn more about the program, apply to the program. It's an amazing experience, and again, we're all still connected. So we're gonna get started with our program. Which is the first part is a moderated conversation between Ana Oliveira and I. So if you guys don't know Ana, you've already read her bio, but she is amazing. And so Ana, can you come up? And my friends and I, who are in the work, jokingly call Ana, I would say godfather, but the godmother. If you need something, you have an issue, you have a question, you go sit with Ana, she'll help you figure it out. So, I'm really, did you know that? You didn't know that. That's true. I was like, did you talk to Ana? What does she know? What does she think about it? So, I'm really excited to be in conversation with Ana this morning. And I've heard the stories of her leadership and her work. But I don't think many of you have, because she's so busy doing the work and she doesn't talk about her journey very often publicly, at least not that I've heard. So this is a rare opportunity for us to hear from Ana and for her to tell us about her work and her journey, and also what she thinks about many of the issues we'll be talking about on the panel. So welcome, Ana.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Nicole. First, let me thank you for being here. I do think that you have an incredible opportunity today with each other, and because of the work that Nicole leads and co-leads with you. Thank you for being so generous and having me here. It is true, I do really not like very much to talk about my particular journey in the world. because it's just not my style. But I have learned that there might be some useful things. Primarily mistakes, because mistakes are risks that we take, and I believe in taking risks. So I come to this from my particular optics, and we'll talk more about that. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you for that. And I don't know if we want to make any changes on the time.
So, what do we have after this? So we have the panel right after this that's supposed to start at 10:45. We have a little bit of a break. I think we'll be fine. We're just gonna roll, and we'll see where it takes us. And we'll just jump into it. So I want to start the conversation about why does the leadership of women of color matter? So we're living in a very critical and urgent moment, and it's also a time where who gets to lead and who gets to talk about issues are really important. So I just wanted to start off and hear what you have to say about why the leadership of women of color, gender nonconforming folks, and transgender people of color matter in this particular moment.
So I wanted to say a couple of things first even about that sentence. I am a Latinx immigrant from Brazil. I come to the U.S., to New York in 1981 to go to school in the evening at the new school, where my dear colleague, Camille Emeguali, is also an alum. I find myself in a different context about ethnicity, race, color. Brazil is a very racist structured country, has a shameful history around slavery and the marginalization of brown and black Brazilians that is enormous. So I transit in that world with enormous amount of privilege with my color of my skin. And I come to New York, and I was going to the new school, but I had to do like a placement thing, because I studied medical anthropology. And I went to the South Bronx. But in 1981 was a different South Bronx. It was not the totally burnt out South Bronx and disinvested South Bronx of the 70s and 60s. It was slightly less, but it certainly is not the gentrification and dispossession that has been happening in the last 5 to 8 years in the South Bronx. And so I discovered a different placement for me in the structures of marginalization and center, which has been an enormous gift, an enormous gift. I always like to talk about that the concept of women of color is a very important solidarity concept, I believe, and has in itself a little bit of the expression of what we call intersectionality sometimes, right? The different ways that aspects of systems come together and separate us and privilege and unprivilege, etc., etc. But I also think it's important to talk about the things that we have in common and the things that we have in difference. And it's very important for me to do that because, for instance, in the vast Latino diaspora, if we don't talk, we Latinos don't talk about our own internalized colorism and racism, we don't dismantle it. Yeah. You know? So I think it's so important. So I wanted to say that when I am relating to Nicole's questions like that, I have these dimensions going on in my head. And I was very happy last night. You know, I'm always very concerned about passing everywhere. You know what I mean? Just passing, passing, passing. And I have this experience that for moments I pass and then I start showing more of me, I stop passing. But last night, and Nicole knows this because we had a meeting right before I went to this event, I went to an event, like a fancy fundraising event. It was not like a regular not-for-profit. You know what I mean? It was a very fancy. Really, I'm telling you, it was very fancy. was at Cipriani Wall Street. And, I had a very nice black jacket and all that. So the dinner began at 7:15. I arrived at 10 to 7. I'm talking hovering around the table, the cocktail was kind of like that, with a very generous person who we both know, who invited me to his table, who is a fantastic Black Planet philanthropy. And so I'm speaking with him and another person, and I was so happy. You're going to understand why. Because, here I am. This event is like 98% very wealthy and white. And then there's a few other folk. But two women came and asked me to help them to set up their place and get their forks and knives. You know what I mean? So I felt very good. I said, they know who I am. I know who I am, but they know who I am. You catch my drift? Yeah. So it was very good for me because it's very important for me to use the privilege that I have to dismantle the privilege that I have. If you know what I mean? So I like the idea that the stereotypes are alive and well towards me because it gives me more of that, and I want to be who I am. I don't want to be perceived as someone else that I'm not. So I was so happy that we're having this conversation today, and this happened last night, because it's just a good reminder how everything is contextual, right? Everything is a little bit contextual that way. So I was very pleased with that. So leadership. Why is important leadership of women of color? Cis, trans. Why is important leadership of folks who are poor, economically challenged? Why is important leadership of folks that fall outside of, the supposedly able people in the world, right? It's important because that's where liberation resides, in my opinion. It's important because it's like the kernels of everything that's needed live in those lives, lives in those minds, hearts, communities. It's important because the wealth of perspective, the size of the perspective, the amplitude is bigger. Is this making sense to you? It's urgent. You talked about urgency. Look, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? What's the alternative? Why would any one of us, and I know this is a question you've answered because you're here. You're not, you found that you have been living and finding places that that's about life, it's not just survival, it's thriving. And I think that the difference about a conscious decision to do something is about going into thriving, regardless of the material conditions, regardless of, all those other measures, is the posture, is the posture that, yes, I generate too. And some of this conversation is about power and leadership, and I think for me, I identify when you said the stuff about being, early ED. I think it's great to take positions that we don't know everything. We should know. If we know everything, we've already done that. We're ready for more. I think it's important. But I think it's important to have, as you said, and you're doing, Nicole, community. It's important to have thought partners. It's important to have people that have our fronts and our backs. What does that mean? It means honesty, people that are going to be honest with us, people that are going to invest, people that have invested in me in spite of me. That's really what I mean. People that, see something about me that I haven't seen about me yet. That has been a gift in my life. So I think that the other thing about leadership, and that women of color are very strong about, that we don't never talk about, is followership. Followership. Nobody leads without followership. We're together there? And the idea that leading is not followership is kind of messed up. This is not, I don't need to do this, but I say that I report to, directly to 6 people who are VPs at the foundation, Camille, Meguali, one of them. I feel like I report to them. In addition to the board, of course, in addition to whatever. But I also report in different ways to all the staff, to the donor. You know what I mean? It really, followership is really underrated. And if you think about it, followership is a necessary and a very mutable thing with leadership, right? Like, when do we really need, when do we really follow? When are we listening? When am I actually making a decision? What is it that I think I'm making a decision? What is it that we are creating processes and environments that decisions come? Do you know what I mean? That others participate, that, so I think it's very difficult to relate to issues of power. Mostly because we all live in a place which is power over people. It's power over people. It's not, the definition of power is not our ability to do in the world what we want to see. To create in the world that's to me is power. But that is not the definition of power that we are used to. So it's very scary to take these positions, because what are you going to do? You're going to identify with the oppressor? You're going to become an oppressor, right? That's not the value. That's not the purpose of even getting to positions, right? So how do we, and it's not like we can do everything we want. I want to be very candid. There are so many constrictions and restrictions. Some of them are legal. Some of them are the level of authority that is given and permitted. Some of them is the level of resources. Some of them is the level of support. There are enormous constraints to express our values within the positions and structures that are there. But none of that should hold you back, and I know it doesn't. None of that should hold you back. Because the more you do it, the more we transform those situations.
This is what I do when I go sit in her office. I just sit and I just listen. She just talks and I just nod my head and take some notes. So I wanted to follow up on something you said about passing in the Cipriani event, and that's a very public, fundraising event. It happens when you go to a department store. Like there's all these moments. But I want to talk a little bit about what that feels like in the social sector, like in our organizations and in the work, because it happens all the time. It happens all the time. And so I want to unpack what that looks like and feels like, and even for someone like you who's been doing this work for a long time, where you push up against those kinds of things.
So I have certain things that if I have the ability, I'd like to leave as my impact, my legacy in things. And in different situations, different things. When I was at GMHC, I had no intentionality, and I wanted to just raise that with you about the importance of intentionality. It's something that has come very late for me in life about seeking certain positions, okay? Just want to say that. I think that that's something that if I were doing a little redo, I would work on that more. I would work on that much earlier in my life. The intentionality of seizing positions. And that's one of the great things I admire about you, Nicole. It takes courage to do that, and I admire that tremendously about you. And I wanted to say that. So when I was at GMHC, Gay Men's Health Crisis had been a really important eruption in the early 80s of a particular, led primarily, but not exclusively, by a community of identified gay men in New York City at the onset of whatever, we didn't even know whatever there was. As HIV got identified, AIDS got named, it expanded and rooted itself where illnesses, where challenges root themselves. And where they root themselves in communities that are underinvested. They have economic, social, wealth, and health vulnerability. That's what happens about anything. I mean, even a hurricane. The impact of anything roots itself and destroys. It propagates in underinvestment and the marginalization from resources and voice and power. That's what happens. So as one epidemic became many epidemics, the organization went through its own crisis, really. And I was a volunteer at the beginning of this epidemic. I was working in the South Bronx. I had a very different experience of the AIDS epidemic. My experience of the AIDS epidemic was poor people, was people of color, was men and women, primarily through heterosexual activity and drug injection activity. But who were already so underinvested that this was one thing on top of many, as opposed to the original dominant constituency, but not exclusive constituency, that started GMHC, for whom their lives were more intact. Are you there with me? AIDS and HIV was an issue that was not piling up with 55 other issues. Maybe one other issue, which was homophobia. You know? So fast forward, so I was a volunteer in the beginning. GMHC had a very powerful, I think still does, group of volunteers, and he did a lot of outreach. And they wanted to do outreach at Rikers Island, and it was hard to get people to volunteer for that. I volunteer for that. So it was me and this other wonderful Latino guy who is no longer with us, but so we went to all the jail presentations. We weren't scared of people, and we could talk with people, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was a volunteer for GMHC for a very long time, and then as women began to be voluminously impacted by HIV and AIDS and began to reach out to GMHC for services. GMHC had nothing, very little of what we would call gender competent, let alone racial and ethnically competent services. But it was open to develop that. So I was hired part-time to do that, to develop programming for women. And most of the women, there were two primary groups of women, kind of a third group beginning, and there was cis heterosexual women that were infected with HIV and AIDS through sexual activity with their partners. Lesbians that were infected mostly, but not exclusively, through drug use. And the beginning of trans women coming to GMHC a little bit. So I began to do that job, and it was a part-time job. It went well. It went well. What I mean is this, and I want to say this. What went well? We had two donors that invested in that. And I want to talk about money and leadership. It's important to not be intimidated by money. Money follows leadership. Money will follow you. That means you need to put your leadership out there. Of course, you need to know your audience and talk in a language they can relate. That's very important. But you're capable of doing that. But money follows leadership. So there were two donors. They were women. They had refused to give to GMHC before because they had nothing for women. One of them is very involved in the Young Men's Foundation. Another one does a lot of work in the justice system, funds a lot of programming, innovative programming. So I was very lucky. That grew, and at the same time, other things did not change in the landscape of it. When I was asked to, the board chair comes to me and to a dear colleague of mine, I told Nicole this, and says, we need one of you to become the next ED, Executive Director. And I said to him, me? Okay, fine, I'm a lesbian, but you know, I'm still a girl. I identify as a girl. It's not, you're not going to get this through the board. I just want you to know that, because I participated in board meetings, you know, running some of the programs, and I knew the reality. GMHC had about $7 million in debt at that time. It had been an organization with enormous privilege, financial privilege, and it had lost its base of private funding as the epidemic became, as combination therapies began to arrive, and the original donors and constituents experienced a different level of, they didn't experience crisis in that way. They did not need what you and I would call to go to an organization. They could go to their private doctor. Are you there with me? So that's when some of the AIDS money in general from private LGBT, mostly G donors, went to things like equal marriage. Yes, it was a historical shift. GMHC goes down in the budget. The majority of the clients come from African diaspora communities, Latino diaspora communities, poor white communities, and poor white men that got poor in the epidemic. You there with me? Yeah. Women with babies and strollers in an organization that, you know, the word women, you know, was kind of unnecessary. So it was a mess. GMHC clients were upset, and the chair of the board came to my colleague Ronald and I and said, one of you guys have to do this, you know? We need to, and it was very well done. It was explicit. He wasn't talking to one person and talking to the other person, not telling us. Are you there with me? Which was really good, really good. It allows us to have conversations, you know, in which I said, I will follow you, I work for you, you know, and no problem. He said, no, I don't want this job. I work for you. And I said, really? Anyway, that was a moment that many of my friends said, you are crazy to do it. And I want to say that it's important to have people, even if you're going to be crazy, you need to know why they think it's crazy. And they said, have you ever seen anybody be an executive director of Gay Men's Health Crisis that is not a white gay man, of middle class or other level of wealth? And I said, of course not. So isn't it funny that they're talking to you, Latino lesbian, and to a black gay man, to be one of you guys to take this when he has $7 million in debt? Zero assets. Zero. No building, no bank account. And the donors were nice people, but they were concerned about something else, their existing donors. But there was something called the clients and the staff. And there was something called what is important to you, what's important to each one of us. So we made an agreement, and I took the position, and I promoted Ronald at the same event, at the same time, to Associate Executive Director, because the board was not open to having co-directors at the time. Probably I would have pushed more for that. I pushed enough and did what I did, and I think he had so many good things. But I'm saying this story because when Nicole and I were talking about, I was talking about, you know, these moments that you find yourself, that you didn't plan for. Look, I never had in my plan, I'm gonna apply to be executive director of Gay Men's Health Crisis. I never did. Not because there's something wrong with that, it just wasn't, this, you know, it wasn't what I had ever thought was my journey in social justice, per se. I told you how I got there. I told you the steps that took me there. But guess what happened? The team did a fantastic job. The organization, and that was because of transparency. And I want to tell you that leadership requires transparency. You can't be transparent about everything. There's laws and regulations and things you can't be transparent about. But the authenticity of what you're doing, the purpose of what you're doing, and what you can and what you can't, that kind of transparency is very important. It's very important. Because I just talked about followership. We paid that debt, we identified the source of the debt. Meaning, was it that the budget every year was bigger than our resources? Was it that we owed money from the past? Was it both? Was it something else? You know what I mean? From a financial point of view. I will tell you another thing. It helps to not grow up rich. It's really good. I'm telling you, when you grow up on Tuesdays and Fridays, you know, with your mother making the list of what we'll be able to afford at the market. You know what I'm saying? Those are the street markets at the time. We didn't have supermarkets in Brazil, in São Paulo. And you go to the market early and you see the prices, then you go back towards the end and you see the things that you can buy cheaper. And you set your priorities. You know, in our case, it was rice and beans and then vegetables, and if we could afford meat, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the case for all of us, I know that. But look at that as skills. It's a skill, it's a strength. You can do a lot with very little. You understand the value of money. You understand how to plan. You understand how to prioritize. Those are essential skills for leadership. You have to be able to understand that money is at the service of your leadership, at the service of the organization. It's not something that will control you. And you need to use it to make good judgment calls. Is this making sense?
Yes.
It does, you know, yes, if you can get an MBA and you like that, go for it. There are other reasons to do that. But you already have in you the resilience around financial resources that you need. And there are gazillion courses that you can take that help you understand a budget this and a budget that, and what is multi-year, what is booked, not booked. You know what I mean? Not a problem. Never get that intimidate you. You know, it's really an important skill. Another skill. You have been able to produce change in the world without having power. You have been able to create your life, to create your people's life, to create your community's life without being in the dominant position of power. Do you realize what kind of skill that takes? Do you realize what that means? That you have to have a clear notion of your North Star. You do a constant analysis of what you got and what you don't got. You do a constant analysis of what people say, the correlation of forces, the adversities and the favorable things. You do that constantly. You're not even aware that you do that. Those are fundamental skills of leadership and of management. Those are fundamental skills of what people call strategic planning, right? You are able, and I know you do this, because you wouldn't even be alive here today to stay the course and to be flexible when you need. You have been able to seed when you have to seed and you know it's smart to seed, and to go back and have the short and the mid-range goal. I don't know every single one of you, I know many of you, and I know that's true for the ones of you that I know, but I guarantee you that it's true for all of you. Those are inherent in the experience of being in various positions in this big category of women of color in this country. And in the world, but I'm speaking about this. So dig deep there. Dig deep there. Understand that there's something about skill, strength, and there's something about the label of the skill. Make them match. Make them match. Yes?
Yes.
So I think Nicole, when she took, this is the thing I'm going to say, you have something else that people that haven't been, I'm going to say, tested, if you know what I mean by that, don't have. It's two things. And that two other super powerful things about you. I talked about courage. What is courage? Courage is not just, I just go and do anything. Courage is really, you see the risk. You are aware of what could be difficult, and you proceed accounting for that to succeed. You proceed. But the other thing you have is you have been tested. We all have fallen. Because there's so many tripping things on the floor, if you know what I mean. Right? We all, and we get up and go. In Brazil we say, get up, dust it off a little bit, and keep on going. You know, there's a little saying that says that. And what's the problem? The problem is when people don't have that experience, they can't do anything. Because it's not the tripping, the getting up. It's the getting up, dusting it, and going with that strength and that knowledge. And that's another inherent thing. So I have been having this conversation with headhunters, that when they are really, and these are headhunters that are committed to the leadership of women of color, that they need to teach the people that are hiring that these are skills that exist, and that they need to look for that in the people.
Thank you.
It's not just a degree, which is good.
Yeah.
So let's just say that she turned GMAC around. And then so GMAC was not intentional, right? So you sort of fell into that role. But New York Women's Foundation was a bit more intentional, and you were prepared for that role. So could you talk about that transition from GMAC to New York Women's Foundation, which I have to say at the time, by the way, was a budget of like maybe $1 million. And if you all don't know, it's over $12 million with a nice sized endowment at this point. And we're going to say that's because of Anna and her staff and money. And you know, everybody. But could you talk a little bit about that?
So, you know, what is that thing? It's important to know when to run, when to fold, when, you know that same thing, right? When to hold, when to, right? Yes. So it's important. It's important. That's about intentionality. That's about being in touch with contacts. That's about having the North Star, right? So when I was asked to do that job at GMHC, it wasn't like, come be DED forever. It was, come get us out of this hole. Which was, I was perfectly dedicated to doing it because the organization was really mostly people of color now. And you know, it's so easy to destroy organizations, and it's so hard to build them. And now, are we going to lose this when most of the clients and most of the staff are people of color? I don't think so. Let's try to do this, you know? So I had done that. And the budget, it was 19 million, 18 when I took, and it had been at 27. But we paid the debt, and when I say we, I mean it was everybody, really, it was everybody. We paid the debt, and we grew it back to 27, 28. And it was time for me. It was time for me to conclude my journey. And I then reached out to 2 headhunters, both of them women of color. And I began to do this weird thing that I had never done, which was to go to interviews like that. You know? It was intimidating. It was weird. It was artificial. I'm being very candid. And you know, you get, this is another thing. People think that you want to do what you did in the past, right? So you've been in gay men's health crisis. Guess the interviews they took me to. Right? San Francisco AIDS Foundation. No, same thing as GMHC, but in San Francisco. Or PFLAG, you know, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, or something like that. Oh, fine, you know, not a problem. But I had no idea. You know what I mean? And it wasn't hitting the spot. But it was good to go to interviews because I got better as I did it. I got better at, you know, just doing better in the interview, you know? And then this particular person keeps saying, so Anna, do you know anybody for the New York Women's Foundation? And I gave all the names I knew, okay? And then 2 months later she says, I want you to go to the interview. And I said, me? The New York Women's Foundation, you know, it's really very respectable organization, you know. I mean, look, I've been working in the South Bronx, gay men's health crisis, you know what I mean? Substance abuse. I work at Osborne Association with enormous pride, criminal justice reform for many years. I said, look at my stuff here. It's not really, you know, fancy that way. And, but a very wise person in my life said, Anna, you can't just ask the headhunter to take you to places. She also has deliverables. She, you know, you're not going to take you've never even gone to the interview, let alone that they want you, let alone that you're going to say yes. So what's the problem? Go to the interview. You are in a long-term relationship with this headhunter, you know, for now and for later. And I am, I want to tell you I am. So, I am. I cultivate that relationship. So, fantastic woman, if you want to know her, I will connect you with her. So I went to the interview with no care in my mind. I went to the interview happy. I had done a little, you know, I went to the website, I did a little research. I also don't want to be dumb in an interview. It's important. And you know, there were 12 people, 12 women in the interview. And I said, okay. Some of them, incredible people that are very, you know, some work at the foundation now, you know. So anyway, you worked out. The first, I was asked back. I was shocked that I was asked back. And the first one, I only answered questions. The second one, I was allowed to ask questions. And the first question I asked is, why did you ask me to come back? And I meant that genuinely. Why are you interested in this conversation with me? And they were offended that I asked that question, which taught me a lot. I'm just sharing this with you because it taught me a lot. I meant it like, what is it that, you know what I mean, we connected on, right? But they heard it as, what's wrong with us, do you know what I mean? and so it worked, surprisingly. I've been very, and then I said to myself, why not try this? I've never been in philanthropy, most likely won't be after this. Because philanthropy is a very powerful sector, but it's a very troubled sector in many ways. It has a lot, we have, you know, it's the privileged pain, and it really is difficult. Important, but difficult. I've been very lucky being in the foundation. I've been very lucky. I've been very lucky with the team and the people that I have worked with. first and foremost. I've been very lucky because I will tell you that somebody told me 6 months into the job, somebody that had been very steeped in quote-unquote women's philanthropy. She said to me, she's not in New York, she's outside New York. Anna, there are, I can count on one hand the number of African American, Black women, Latinas, and Asian women. I have never met a Native American woman, she said, or a woman of Arab descent. I can count the ones that I met in one hand that have made it over a year in women's foundations. And I'm like, okay, why? She said, because to make it, you have to have somebody invest in you. You have to have some money invested in you that makes it then okay for others to invest in you. Are we together in this conversation? So that was a gift to me. That was a gift to me. This was somebody that doesn't live in New York. She's a white woman in the south of the U.S., very committed to social justice, racial justice. And I then began to dwell, in this thing. And I didn't really have an answer. I'm just going to say that very candidly. I didn't really have an answer. But my first anniversary was coming up, and we have a very big event, which is a breakfast in May. And we had to begin to discuss who we're going to honor. And I was asked, Anna, who do you think we should honor? Like one recommendation, we honor more than one person. And I said, let's look at the people that have been making this place as board members, as past board members, as donors as well, because we had already identified 2 other honorees that came from other life trajectories. And I say this because it's important for you to know this, It came out as somebody that I knew before the foundation, somebody that had been connected with the foundation, Abigail Disney. So I said, look, Abby has served the foundation this many years. She just rotated off from the board. She's been a voice for very progressive growth of the foundation. Sometimes more lonely, sometimes with more echo. And, it was a privilege of being the ED. They let me move her name forward, and many people, wanted to join, and we honored Abby. Abby calls me 1 week before the breakfast. And I'm like, take the call, and she says, I am so moved. She was almost in tears on the other side of the phone that the foundation is recognizing me. And I know that's because of you. Because I know, and I had met with Abby before taking the job. She said, take the job, but know that you have to move this more to the social justice progressive side. Know that, she said to me. In that call, she said, I'm giving you $1 million. And I said, oh my God, I'm giving the foundation $1 million. I'm going to make that announcement at the breakfast. And then I was in tears on this side. I was, it still moves me because I went right back to what that person said to me. Are you there with me? Yes. And it is true, After that happened, 3 other people did the same. Not the day after, could have been fine if they had been the day after. It would have been fine, I became used to that number quickly, but it happened a little bit within like 3 or 4 months. So I'm saying this to you because I had no, Abby hadn't given that before. Do you understand what I mean? It wasn't, we wanted to honor Abby because of Abby. And that takes me to my last point to you, which is authenticity. I mean, no matter what all the challenges are, all the, I said before, there's so many restrictions and constrictions. Given all that, that's territory that comes with anything. It doesn't matter that. It does matter, but it doesn't for the expression of authenticity. Even if the expression of authenticity is to recognize the limitation of what one can do. Are we together there? I think that for me, I've done my best when I can come up to that. And I have not done well with donors that don't respond to that. You need to know that. I have not done well with donors that don't respond to that. There are people that do better than I do. There are people that get way more money than I do, that are more comfortable in different ways than I am on that. That doesn't mean, I would encourage you to develop a tool belt as big as you can have it. What is a tool belt? Skills, approaches that are who you are, but give you reach beyond who we have been in our birth, if you know what I mean by that. Because I think that power is really the ability to be who I am and transcend the prescriptions of what I'm supposed to be. And I think that power, for me, is the ability to do with, to create the change that we want to see there. It's not so much to be right, but to be effective. For me personally, my ego is in being effective. I don't like being dumb. What I mean by that is I want to make better mistakes, because I make them all the time. I just want to make better ones. The most important people to me, the people that I trust the most, that I rely the most, are the ones that can tell me that, Anna, the door is over there, not over here. And I go, yeah, let's go there. Are we together there? So, and last thing, know who you are. Nicole talked about self-care. Look, we talk about trauma-informed work, right? Trauma-informed work is with ourselves too. To me, when I hear self-care, I translate into that for me. And there's power in that. Own it. Look for the resources and the people that resonate with you that way, that understand that survivalship, authorship, transformation are all expressions of life and, that power to generate life. Know who you are. I work hard to pay attention to me, to my limitations. I try not to be who I'm not. That is not what has gotten me to my best work. Is being more of who I am, but being better of that. Knowing my value added, I think each one of us needs to know our specialties, our specialness, our uniqueness that way. What difference I bring to this, when in doubt, you face the fork, take the fork. Don't stay back, take the fork. Move ahead, It's very important. Course correction, nimbleness, inspiration is more important than any one rigid definition of success. And I just want to put a plug for solidarity. We need to talk more about what that means. We need to talk more about what that is. We can't talk about intersectionality and not have operational definitions and practices of solidarity. Those two things go together, and it's not optional. Now I act in solidarity, now I don't act in solidarity. So I want to acknowledge one of the great persons that you're going to hear from in a minute, Bev Tillery, who came to me and said, Anna, we're cis women, let's do something actively in consistent solidarity with trans women. So I do expect myself, as I said before, as a light-skinned Latina immigrant, to be direct, not occasional, solidarity and priority with my brown and black sisters. I do expect myself, as a cis woman, to be in consistent solidarity with my trans community folk. I do expect, you know what I mean? I do expect that of myself. And it's not an optional thing. Now I act in solidarity, now I don't act in solidarity. You know? It's a condition of our living together. And very pragmatic. Seizing power is important.
You see, I asked 2 questions, by the way. That's it. This has been the best conversation. I hope that you all have gotten as much out of it as I have gotten. And the only thing I want to say that I didn't get to ask, or we didn't get to talk about, is on this point of solidarity. I want to say that, and we'll hopefully talk about this on the panel, but Anna is a champion of mine and of many women of color, and she's also saved my life many a times when I've gone through that wrong door. And I've also seen her in closed doors go to bat for other women of color for positions and to help open those doors. And so that is, in addition to what she talked about in terms of solidarity, this is other ways where you have just been, you know, everything. So I just want to thank you all for engaging and leaning into this conversation. We have a really exciting panel coming up with really amazing and dynamic leaders. So I invite you to stay engaged. Our hashtag is Ready to Lead 2019, and that's it. And we're going to take a short break so we can transition and set the panel up. And so we'll see you in a couple minutes.